The Dharma, incomparably profound and exquisite, is rarely met with even in hundreds of thousands of millions of kalpas. We now can see it, hear it, accept and hold it. May we realize the true mind of the Tathagata. I was a little surprised by that voice coming out of the computer a minute ago saying the recording is in progress, because that was the first time that's happened so far. But then we just recently had updates in the operating system, and Zoom has been updating as well. So always a new adventure, always a new adventure. This is life. I'd like to share with you today some of Hakuin's words. Hakuin, as you know, was the great Zen master, Japanese Zen master, who is credited with single-handedly reinvigorating, resurrecting really, a morbid Rinzai Zen in Japan in his era. He was born in the 1600s, died in the 1700s, and that era, as happens in every culture, ups and downs, ups and downs, ups and downs. When a religion is new, it was dealt with suspicion often, but then as it begins to catch on, people realize, assuming it has value, which probably does, that it has value, and there's a great amount of enthusiasm, and then it begins to get stale, and people begin to invest in it for political reasons, for reasons of gaining notoriety, for reasons of having power, for reasons of looking important, and all kinds of other ego-related reasons. And then over time, the religion begins to reach a different and more, let's say, it loses its vigor, and the original impact of the religion on people is considerably less. And that happens over and over and over with Buddhism as well as other religions. And the one saving grace of Buddhism is that, at least with Rinzai Zen, it demands that in order to carry on the lineage, one has to have demonstrated and had it authenticated by a teacher who has him or herself demonstrated and had it authenticated as well, that one has reached a deeper level of understanding, has had at least one kensho, and that kensho is deep enough to really allow a person to see more than superficially deep. In Hakuin's time, that had begun to fail, and he spent his early part of his life searching for a true teacher, delving deeply himself into practice, into Zen practice. In those days in Japan, the teaching was done through lecture meetings, sort of lecture gatherings in various different temples by various different priests on a given Buddhist text. And the teacher may or may not have understood the real deep meanings of that text or not. It all depends. But this is how monks in Japan in those days were trained. They went from place to place, attending these lecture meetings, which were often, several days, even a week or more in length, and gained whatever insight they had into practice through those lecture meetings. At one point, Hakuin attending one of those lecture meetings, and he'd been traveling with a small band of monks. He decided to absent himself temporarily from the meeting and just do zazen, and do it as deeply and with as great intention as possible. And as a result, when morning came and the morning bell was rung, this great bell that is typical in Zen temples in Japan, a very tall bell. It's also typical in China. It's a huge bell. Sometimes they can be 8-10 feet in height. The one at Sogenji was more modest. It was more like 4.5 feet tall, heavy bronze, and it's rung at daily at certain times of the day. In Japan currently, it's rung at dawn, more or less at dawn, and again at dusk. And there are specific sutras that are chanted. In the case of Sogenji, it was the Enmei-juku Kannon-gyo, and it was done, if I remember right, it was done 7 times. There were stones laid out in the bell tower so that one could count the number of recitations, and one struck the bell in certain ways and called out in a loud voice the recitation of the Enmei-juku Kannon-gyo, the 10-verse Kannon Sutra. In Japan, particularly in Kyoto, where there are many temples, you can hear these bells rung in the morning and in the evening. The lay version of this, at least in Okayama, was a recording, and it was of Danny Boy, the Irish song Danny Boy was played in instrumentally on loudspeakers all over the city. So that announced the time of the evening. So Hakuin, at the sound of the bell, had a Kensho experience. And he had strained so hard at his practice, and strained is the word, that he got a Kensho. It was not significant, although he assumed that it was incredibly significant. And he felt that it was the deepest Kensho anyone had had in 300 years. It wasn't until he met Dokyo Eitan, who was a deeply realized master, who wouldn't let him be passed on the answers he gave on the koans, but insisted that he go deeper. And so he did. And that's to Hakuin's credit. The strain, as some of you know, resulted in a great deal of nervous energy. He would break out into cold sweats. He had a hard time sleeping because he had just relentlessly pushed himself in a way that was not taking things into consideration. And that, of course, has gotten passed down to us, those of us who practice Japanese Zen. But I won't go so much into that today, because I've talked about that in previous teishos. I'd like to share part of a writing of his called Orategama. And it was early on translated, and then I think retranslated as well by Norman Waddell, who's the premier translator of Hakuin, and really seems to catch his personality. And this has come about because in Hakuin's chant in praise of Zazen, the Zazen Wasan, he talks about different forms of practice. Now, these were, that part was eliminated in the translation done by the Rochester Zen Center, probably because Mitra-roshi wanted to really encourage his students to go straight through Zen. It may also have had something to do with Mitra-roshi's personality as well. But whatever it is, I can't ask him because he's long gone. Both of them are long gone. And but it is still extant in other translations at other Zen centers. And it talks about chanting the Buddha's name. That is the practice of the Pure Land sect. Chanting Namo Amida Butsu, Namo Amida Butsu, praise to Amida Buddha, with the idea that one is reborn in the Pure Land, away from any hellish experiences in this land, in this life. And there's also chanting the Nembutsu, which is the Lotus Sutra, Namamyo Ho Renge Kyo, praise to the Lotus Sutra. And of course, there's Zazen, there's chanting, there's studying the sutras. There's all kinds of practices. And within Zazen, there's also koan work, shikantaza, and the extended out breath. So there are many, many different practices. And here Hakuin addresses this in this Orategama, which was written in 1751. The Pure Land practitioners today believe only that the Buddha is in the Western land and are unaware. Sorry, I just put eye drops in, so my eyesight is a little foggy. Start over again. The Pure Land practitioners today believe only that the Buddha is in the Western land and are unaware that the Western land is the basis of their own minds. They're convinced that through the power of the recitation of the Buddha's name, they will somehow leap through space and after they are dead, be reborn in the Western land. The true practitioner of the Pure Land doctrine is not like this. It does not contemplate birth. It does not contemplate death. His mind does not falter or fall into error. Reciting the name of the Buddha, constantly he has reached the state where the mind is undisturbed. The great matter appears suddenly before him, and his salvation is determined. Such a man, or a person really, woman could be as well, such a person can be called one who has truly seen into their own nature, which is Kensho. Their own body is the limitless body of Amida, the treasure trees of 7 precious gems, the pond of the 8 virtues. Their own mind is illuminated and radiates before their very eyes. And then elsewhere in this writing of Hakuin, this is written as well in the same Orategama. Supposing you have one person who is occupied with the koan of one hand. That was a favorite koan of Hakuin. He was not very enthusiastic about the koan mu. He felt that the koan of one hand, you know what the sound of 2 hands is. What is the sound of 1 hand? Is more effective than the koan mu. These vary according to cultural conditions. And another who devotes himself exclusively to the calling of the Buddha's name. If the meditation of the former is not pure, the one working on the koan, if their determination is not firm, even if they devote themselves to the koan for 10 or 20 years, they will gain no benefit whatsoever. The person who calls the Buddha's name, on the other hand, should they call it with complete concentration, and here this is very much the point, and undiluted purity, should they neither concern themselves with the filthy, mundane world, nor the pure land, seek the pure land, but proceed determinedly without retrogression, they will, before 10 days have passed, gain the benefits of Samadhi, which is another very important point for practice. Produce the wisdom of the Buddha and achieve the great matter of salvation in this very place where he stands. Whether you sit in meditation, recite the sutras, intone the dharani, or call the Buddha's name, if you devote all your efforts to what you're doing and attain to the ultimate, you will kick down the dark cave of ignorance, gain the benefit of Samadhi, achieve the wisdom of the Buddha, and attain salvation in the very place you stand. The content of the practice may vary, but what difference is there in the goal that is reached? And how we work on our practice. Since this is the first day of Sesshin, I want to address this fully. How we work on our practice makes all the difference in the world. We come to Zen practice through curiosity, or as in my case, through having no alternative, with recognition that there was nothing else in my life that would ever bring lasting happiness to me, that always there would be these points between bits of happiness where there was extreme challenge, in my case, pain and suffering, both physical and otherwise. And so I knew that the only alternative to that pain and suffering was to adopt Zen practice and go into it as deeply as possible. That said, there are many of us in that case, at least trying to escape a more challenged, more painful, more difficult life through Zazen. If the motivation is right, it works. If the practice is right, it works. It works even if there isn't suffering in life, but for most people who come to Zen practice, there is some level of suffering. Toni Packer once told me that she had only met one person ever who had not come to practice through some level of suffering. And then she added, it only took him 6 months to uncover it. As the Buddha said, being born is an experience of suffering. Growing up can be the experience of suffering, particularly if one has had less than optimal parents and has experienced what are known as adverse childhood experiences. Even with excellent parents, it still such a thing can happen. So then we get sick or not. Right now we're in the midst, hopefully coming out through the end. Excuse me, of an extreme epidemic. The COVID-19 virus has taken literally millions of lives throughout the world. And every time it seemed that a country was free of it, or mostly free of it, like Italy, like India, there's been a rebound in cases. So many people have lost many people they knew. And on top of that, because of the restrictions and all the chaos that is the result of people balking at the restrictions, there's been a lot of challenge in this world in the last 2 years. There's concerns about how parents can manage to both do remote work and remotely school their kids, and a lot of other things. And then, of course, we get old, if we live that long, and we die. And many people, particularly as they get older, begin to fear death. In fact, many people who are not old fear death. And for a good part of my life, death has been held at arm's length by most people in the culture. In other cultures, death is a normal occurrence. It isn't hidden from view, but in America, it was hidden from view for a long time. And people often will send their dying family members to the hospital just so they don't have to be there when they die, out of their own fear. And yet, to go truly deep in our practice, we will open to the recognition that death is just another experience in life, in ongoing life, in life without beginning and without end. And for those people who have realized this deeply enough, there is freedom, there is joy, there is not being caught by the pain and suffering, even if they're in the midst of it in their own lives. And this is the promise of Zazen. But in order to get there, we have to go about it in the appropriate ways. Hakuin eventually, after his 19th, or with his 19th Kensho experience at the age of 53, I think it was finally finding himself truly at peace. And this was someone who, as a child, was terrified of falling into hell. In fact, that is, as you heard in the opening ceremony, why he actually started practice, why he became a Buddhist monk, was because he thought at the time that if he became a Buddhist monk, he would not fall into hell. That fact, he had a rude awakening to the error of when he heard about Ganto, the great Chinese monk, deeply enlightened monk, screaming as he was being killed by bandits. But eventually Hakuin, in one of the Kensho experiences, exclaimed, "Ganto is alive and well right now, right here." And that is something that you can realize as well. Traditionally, we assume that we have to strive, or at least we're urged to strive in our practice. But practice is an exploration. And the aspect of practice that is most important is this ability to get into Samadhi, or one-pointed awareness of whatever you're practicing. And even deeper Samadhi, to the point where you disappear. A frightening prospect for many people. And there is a certain point in time in pretty much everyone's practice where that fear comes up. It's important in order to reach this level of focus and attention and awareness, that we don't do it by brutalizing anything else in our awareness. There is this instruction to cut thoughts. And so we assume we have to not have any. And if we do, we have to just chop them off at the ankles. And so we spend our times whacking our way through a forest of thoughts on the cushion with our machete. And that's not effective practice. Effective practice is more like you're reading this absolutely fascinating book, and you're aware that there's an airplane flying overhead, or that a siren screams by, or that a dog barks, and so on and so forth. But these are superficial, peripheral awarenesses. The main focus is this incredibly engrossing story or movie. Those are times, and also in sports too. And I think this is why rock climbing is so exhilarating a sport, because you have to focus. One lack of attention for even a fraction of a second, and you could fall thousands of feet if you're climbing. And so it is vital to be absolutely one-pointed focus. Your next view is where you put your hand and feet next in order to continue the climb and not to fall. And if you start to think about it, it's all over. There has to be this single-minded, wordless focus. And that's what practice is about. It's relatively easy to do it under dire circumstances, such as the life and death experiences of climbing, technical climbing, or in the midst of a hot game of soccer or some other sport. You don't have time to think. You're just responding to circumstances. It's a kind of samadhi. It's not the kind of samadhi necessarily that will bring you to awakening, but it's definitely on the path. And for many people, it's addictive because it is so such a phenomenal experience. But in Zen practice, it's a little bit different in that we come with a whole suitcase full of baggage. There's a wonderful poem by a woman whose last name was Hamilton. I read it a long time ago in a New Yorker magazine. She was a Zen student, and it's just a wonderful expression of Zen practice. If you want to try looking it up on the web, you might be able to find it. The title was Zazen. And I don't remember her first name, but I think she had 3 names, and the last of which was Hamilton. Give it a try. You'll find it is so apt in terms of Zen practice. If I thought about this ahead of time, I would have printed out a copy and been able to recite it for you. But along the way in Zen practice, we open to uncover whatever stuck places, as Chi-san so aptly calls them, that are in our minds. If we've had experiences that were less than optimal, particularly if they were painful or dark or frightening, we tend to bury them. And those things will come back up to consciousness as we do our Zazen, because Zazen takes the lid off, and necessarily so, because in order to truly be free, we have to open to where we're caught. And as you also heard a number of times, this wonderful statement by a woman who had a devil of a time in a Sesshin in Rochester, and yet ended up having a Kensho in that experience, in that Sesshin, said this practice is truly bodhisattvic. First, it shows us where we're caught, and then it sets us free. But it will only set us free if we look bravely at where we're caught when it comes up. And if it's a relatively mild caught place, as it comes up into consciousness, as we're doing our Zen practice, simply to acknowledge the felt experience of this, not the story, not the ideas, but the felt experience of this, and then return to whatever your assigned practice is, whether it's a koan, whether it's the extended out breath, whatever it is very, very effective part of practice, very essential part of practice. If it's more compelling, and compelling can be in the realm of frightening, terrifying, mainly, painful. These are things we really, really don't want to feel. We've spent a life trying to keep them out of sight, out of feltness. And yet, in order to become free of them, we have to open to the experience in our bodies where they're stuck. As Bessel van der Kolk, the foremost researcher in trauma, titled his book, "The Body Keeps the Score." And it's true. These experiences they reside as caught energy in our bodies. And as long as they stay there as caught energy, they drive us behind the scenes. And they cause us pain and suffering. And these kinds of things, if they're really intense, it's best to find a therapist who is trained in working with these kinds of experiences, particularly hopefully someone who also does Zazen themselves, so that they have an understanding of what's going on besides the actual psychological components, and can be very effective. And as every single one of my Zen fellow students who are therapists or psychotherapists or psychologists have told me, a person who is doing Zazen and therapy is going to progress much faster in both realms for doing them both. As you continue your practice, bravely walking in, being curious, openness to possibility. Awakening is before our very eyes. We just don't recognize it. And if we try to compartmentalize it and see it as a certain form, we're putting a mountain between us and the experience, and it's not going to work. This is why Samadhi is so important. When we forget ourselves, deeply forget ourselves, that's when the recognition can come. And it is an essential precursor to Kensho, to awakening of any level. The deeper we go, the deeper the awakening. The more completely we experience this state called Samadhi, and you're not going to experience it because it's beyond your personal experience. This is the disappearing that has to happen for deep realization. And this is what people fear, that they will disappear, because disappearance can seem like death. As a matter of fact, a friend of mine, a long ago Dharma sister, Mexican woman who was actually a therapist, in a Sesshin that I was in Mexico, she had a Kensho experience. And afterwards she said to me, I honestly thought I was dying. I honestly thought I was dying. This is a big fear. It takes a lot to come into life. I think about all the miscarriages that happen. There was one in the news recently with Harry and Meghan had a miscarriage before they got pregnant with their new daughter, Lilibet. And it's a painful experience for the mother and the father. It's also an experience for the being, the little being that is trying to be born and not succeeding. In Buddhism, it's famous that it takes tremendous good karma to become born as a human being, particularly born as a human being who has access to the karma of encountering Buddhism and being drawn to practice it. Because there are plenty of people who encounter Buddhism and have no interest whatsoever. And so that avenue to awakening, to freedom, is not, it just isn't there for them. They lack the level of interest and commitment that is essential for it to happen. It's considered as rare to become a human being and to have access to an interest in and commitment to Buddhist practice, as it is for a sea turtle who is living in the vast oceans and only comes to the surface once every 500 years. And somehow, in that moment, coming into that surface, finds himself sticking his head through a knothole in a board that's floating on the surface. It's that rare. We can be immensely grateful that we have access to this practice. That we live in a country where there is access. That we can encounter a teacher who genuinely can understand how to practice. And that we have the motivation to go ahead and do it. This is really in the realm of miracles. And so to be able to go about it in an effective way, which I just described, in which Hakuin, you heard earlier, spoke of, is even more incredible. So dive in, be curious. This is what will be the most effective aspect of our practice, to be open to possibility, whatever your practice is, whether it's a koan, whether it's shikantaza, whether it is extended out breath, that element of openness to possibility is essential to find results. And openness to possibility means you don't have a preconceived notion about it. Because if you have a preconceived idea about what Kensho is and how you're going to get there, it's like building yourself a tunnel of walls without access to the real experience. So everyone here is already on the path. Everyone here is already well endowed to walk it deeply and with great success. So don't let anything stand in your way. Dive in, dive in, dive in. Thank you for listening. We'll stop now and recite the 4 vows. Oops, that I did not want to do that. I wanted to stop the recording. Which it appears that I did. We'll find out shortly. And since we still have some time left in about 10 minutes to sit, let's continue with Zazen. But first we'll recite the 4 vows. Shujo muhen segando bono mujin segandan homon muryo segangaku butsudo mujo seganjo Shujo muhen segando bono mujin segandan homon muryo segangaku butsudo mujo seganjo Shujo muhen segando bono mujin segandan homon muryo segangaku butsudo mujo seganjo. Sentient beings are numberless. I vow to liberate them. Clinging is inexhaustible. I vow to put an end to it. Dharma gates are boundless. I vow to master them. The way of liberation is unsurpassable. I vow to become it.